Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Open Network User Group podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, the Onug Working Group CTO. Listen, Onug has been laser focused on 4 topics recently: connect, secure, observe, and automate in the multi-cloud space. Today, we're going to have some laser focus on the connect space. And I've got 3 great guests who are going to join me to discuss the concept of elastic infrastructure. All right, but first, let me talk about Onug Spring 2022. It's going to be at the Meadowlands Expo Center, New Jersey, April 27th and 28th. Join the Onug community of Global 2000 companies, enterprise architects, cloud providers, thought leaders as we explore the building blocks required to create flexible, transformative IT business platforms. Go to onug.net to register for this event today. All right, so let's bring in one of my partners in crime. He's a good guy. We're going to talk about the Network Cloud team, and joining me to talk about the Network Cloud team is Steve Wood. Steve is the principal engineer for enterprise architecture and software-defined networking and cloud at Cisco. Steve, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going pretty good, Mark.
Listen,
pretty good.
do you have a favorite working group? I mean, do I have a favorite child? Of course I do, but you don't say it. Like, you can't say it out loud. But let's just say I have strong feelings for the Network Cloud Working Group, and part of it is, it's led by you, and it's a great team, right? We've got some really amazing people on this team.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark, for sure. I mean, I've been around the Onug working groups since their inception. I've worked in a few different ones, and and this one has been by far the most interesting and the most dynamic one. There's so much change going on in the network, so many things at so many times at the same time. Just trying to pull it together and get a framework built for it and make sense of it is a great. It's great, actually. We've been doing a lot of good work in that area.
Some amazing work. And, one of the more shy members of the team, we're going to bring on Nuno Ferreira. Nuno is the CTO for distributed cloud at F5. Nuno, how you doing, buddy?
Hi, very good, Mark. Hi, Steve.
I'm going to try to bring you out of your shell today, Nuno.
Sorry?
I'm going to try to bring you out of your shell today.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm very shy, and it's very hard for me to come out of the shell. So sorry, guys.
I've got a gong here, and we'll use that when we need to, Mark. Okay.
Exactly. Now we've got a veteran, an Onug podcast veteran, who's going to join us as well, also on the Network Cloud team. Mark Fishburne. Mark is the president of MarketWord. Mark, I just can't shake you, man. You're just showing up everywhere, and I love it.
Full-time job.
For those of you who are interested in Zero Trust, Mark is also on the Cloud Native Security team and author of one of our more recent blogs. Mark just recently authored a blog called Zero Trust, an Overnight Sensation Decades Later. You can also check that out on our content tab at onug.net. So check that out. Mark, thanks again for all that hard work. I appreciate it. Okay, but today we're talking about Network Cloud, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Onug's really focused on things that our membership has told us is important to them, and it's around these 4 concepts of connect, secure, observe, and automate. The aspect of connect today is changing so fast that I think people are having a very difficult time dealing with this. And for that reason, Steve, your team decided, like, we need to have a white paper, but later we said it's not. It's like a playbook. Tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are coming to a confluence in the network space and the security space and the public data center space. And part of that is, the idea of disaggregation, which means that there's, where everything used to be integrated full stack network element. It was, one thing to deal with. Now we're seeing that disaggregation happen, functions, security, routing, policy, and other things. And there's so much choice out there right now. And then, how do we basically bring that together so that we can transform the network? So it's clear that what the transformation, at least to me, that happened in the data center over the past few years is now coming to the network. And then what does that mean for how we want to deploy networks? What does it mean for how we think about building networks in the future, and how we do security, and how we make applications run over this at the best and most secure way we can? And so we want to look at this in the full approach, and try to look at it from the user perspective. What do I need to be thinking about at each layer in order to make this on-demand connectivity that we need for the new remote workforce?
So sitting in a chair, sitting from your high perch at Cisco, you've got a pretty good view of what customers are looking for. But Nuno, so does the F5 team. Like, how does F5 view this like rapidly changing landscape?
Yeah, so there's a couple of trends that we've been analyzing over the past years. So if you think about network wise, and because we're talking about connectivity, the connectivity is changing quite a lot because the applications are transforming into not only applications, but they are being multiplexed into an API. So pretty much, if you start doing kind of an overview of what kind of traffic goes on in your data center or in your internal environment, in your corporate infrastructure, you can see that's pretty much like 80% is going to be either a tunnel or an API. And because of this API-driven infrastructure, now you have to think about network and security. And Steve mentioned network and security because they are tied together, and they are, because once you connect, you have to secure. But if you think about it, that now all your traffic is either a tunnel or an API, you have to think about it in the perspective of how can I do segmentation, micro-segmentation, nano-segmentation, and all those segmentations that everyone talks about in the world, when the traffic now is pretty much all the same. Because if it's multiplexed in an API, it's going to have a very similar five-tuple, very similar construct that you cannot split in a network layer. So it needs to go a little bit on a higher layer. The second trend that we've seen as well, and Stephen mentioned this very briefly, is the workforce, right? Is COVID shown us what really is going to happen, and people are moving to their homes. They are working from their houses. They are working from public environments now that things are reopening due to COVID, or due to the taking off the impositions and the restrictions of COVID. People are now starting to move again, but they are working more remotely than ever, right? So people are not going as much back to the office. So these two trends is how users can reach applications, and then how applications connect to applications. Those are the ones that are very important in terms of the connect, and then they will bring the secure and the observability and all those other items.
So as we sort of set this up, and I want everybody to chime in on this a little bit, but as we set this up, the original concept of the playbook was rallying around this concept of or concepts of elasticity and agility, right? In fact, at one point the team name was Elastic Infrastructure. What does that mean? Like, I think that's what, maybe starting with, what does it mean to be, or have elastic infrastructure properties and benefits? Mark, do you want to take a first shot at this? Like, what do you feel like these attributes and why these attributes should resonate with the enterprise?
Well, as you say, it started to be called elastic infrastructure, but what's elastic is the nature of business these days, as both Steve and Nuno said. It's really this rapidly changing world that's agility is the number one in all of this, and therefore it's really important to really understand how business agility can be introduced, and it's why we have called it a playbook. These days, and particularly I think a big role for Onug is to provide guidance in the absence of standards, guidance in the absence of common APIs and so on. So that's what we attempted to do here, is to provide a very elastic, flexible infrastructure that would be tuned to the needs as they progress. And perhaps I could say a few words about why it really changes things from what's happened in the past.
Yeah, do it.
So really, networks have always benefited from a layered structure that allows implementation at one layer to be agnostic of what's going on above and below it. And it's really allowed seamless migration for, say, SD-WAN to be agnostic to transport, internet protocols to be transmitted over a variety of infrastructures. And so this new network cloud model is now able to do the same at the business level. So as new business cases are introduced, market requirements evolved as we move to a hybrid workforce, as it's now being called, companies grow, partner, and merge. It's this layered approach really enables changes to control, policies, and security to migrate, and without wholesale changes to the network and infrastructure in order to shift from one to another. And similarly, new technologies come and go. And with this model, without disruption, it really accelerates innovation, introduction of new disruptive technologies, and it also allows experimental business practices without impacting, critical core revenue streams for the enterprise organization. So that's kind of my kind of feeling about the value of all of this. It really shifts from a model that was technology focused to one that's business focused.
So that's that makes a lot of sense. And I know in a bit we're going to share some images about how we represented that. But Steve, tell us a little bit about how you've guided the team on what I feel like is one of, and Mark just touched on it a bit, but one of the best values of Onug, or the most important aspects of Onug rather, is we do stay laser focused on business value.
100%, and 100%, Mark. And this journey started for me in Onug, because I still remember I was sitting in an Onug meeting, is probably an Onug fall meeting, because I'm pretty sure it was in New York, and I wish I was back there. I would hopefully get back there soon.
Right.
But I remember listening to Chris Drumgoole. I think he was a CTO of GE at the time. I'm not sure if he still is, but he gave this awesome talk, right, about what he was doing to transform GE, into an agile business. And what the thing that resonated with me, he's trying to create these tribal groups of people who could just basically start and deploy business processes on a platform, new businesses, digital businesses, on a platform that they could essentially innovate in the business layer. And I thought, okay, well, that's really cool, right? Well, what does this mean? We have this, we have this infrastructure in the cloud that is basically virtualized. You can tear it up, you can set it up, tear it down in minutes, right? That's the kind of elasticity we're talking about, right? How do we do that, but not just in the data center? How do we do that in the network? How do we do that for security? And then basically bring that together so that I can virtualize my infrastructure and push that virtualization as far out as possible, so that I can get that on-demand nature of connectivity plus security plus applications, right, and then performance, and plus users. So the whole kind of gamut, right, from the user to the application. And so that's what we that really kind of charged me up, and that's where I was trying to guide the team here, is so let's think about what the infrastructure looks like to make this happen right through the network, not just in the data center.
So Nuno, it's you can't have a discussion about agility and time to market without having an F5 discussion. I mean, now obviously there's more to F5 than traffic management. That's a bias that I've always had. But how does this story resonate with you and with F5 in terms of business value and how the playbook's going to help?
Yeah, so one of the things that we at F5, and talking a little bit about F5, what we thought about F5 is that the people will need to start creating levels of abstraction. Normally, if we think about problems that companies have, they start up as a business problem, right, with a business driver, and then the technical people transform that into how can we solve that business problem in a technical way, and suddenly it becomes a technical problem, right? And then people start talking about the bits and the bytes and how to solve those problems technically, and they get them solved technically, and several times at the end the business guy comes, is how is my initial business problem being actually solved with all these things, right? And when we say all these things, we say all the proliferation of devices, vendors, things that the technical guys kind of architect together to try to solve that business problem, right? So when we start thinking about how can we solve business problems, and going back to what Mark and Steve have mentioned about agility and elasticity, we have to think about collaboration, right? Collaboration between teams, collaboration between NetOps, DevOps, SecOps, developers, and all these things come together. And when we say collaboration, we say that these teams cannot be silos anymore, and these teams needs to come together in a platform that unites them, and they are able to communicate and actually share the information. Because if you think about how things are done right now, is that there is a problem, a customer or a user is complaining about a specific problem, and you have kind of the network guy go and figure out what's going on in their environment. The security guy goes and figures out what's going on in their environment. The DevOps guy the same, the developer the same, and then they get together in the round table to start share their findings, right? Because these teams don't naturally talk to each other, or they don't share the day-to-day together next to each other.
That sounded like a war room, and I'm starting to get the shakes.
Right, exactly. But the problem is that when they get to the round table to share their findings, first of all, the problem is not there anymore, and second, it already caused the business impact to the company and to the organization, and it's too late. So that bringing up of the teams together in a collaboration way, it's very important for people to get aware of the problems before they cause a business impact, and maybe solve it actually, before they cause that. And going back to the elasticity and agility of the infrastructure needs to be agile enough not only to cope with the new technologies, and we talk about microservices and serverless functions, which they really need elasticity and not really HA and high availability, and know all these big sets of infrastructure that we've been building throughout the years to make sure that application is not going to die. What these new modern applications need is they need an infrastructure that is able to discover new iterations and new replicas of this application, rather than having a bunch of infrastructure making sure that application is not going to die, right? So it's a completely different paradigm. It's the application might die, and the application should die as fast as possible, right? And then discover the new application so that they can be serving the people as fast as possible.
So part of this paradigm shift that I'm hearing you talk about is, I mean, there's an observability play here, right? In terms of how organizations approach, the tech that they buy, how they implement it, and how they interoperate with it and with each other. To understand, what the condition of their business is in, right? So that it sort of demands getting people on the same page. Steve, I know you'd mentioned to me, that building off that topic, then that maybe companies need to think differently about how they are acquiring stuff, right? Whatever that stuff is, gear, software, platforms. Is that true?
Yeah,
I mean, we need to think
100%,
differently
Mark. So
about.
I take, I think we need to be a little bit more informed by, the way the internet itself in terms of applications has grown, right? When we look at the, hyperscalers like Meta or Google or others, right? Here's maybe a small example. If I'm building an application, I need, mapping data in that application or mapping. I'm not going to build my own mapping unless I need something really, 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 really specialized. And I'm not even going to buy a package mapping application. I just want to take advantage of a service that's already out there. So when I think about how applications are built, how does that map to how we're building connectivity and security, right? I don't necessarily, I don't necessarily want to be, the details of that integration. All I want to do is basically build build my services out, in a layered fashion, in a way that lets me to use APIs for, APIs between the layers, so I can take advantage of, services that are already pre-built for me. So for example, I'll give a network example. I have an SD-WAN service, right? It's delivered in a co-location facility. It's managed by somebody else. I don't know who, or I do know who. I mean, I'm buying it from a vendor or from a service provider of some sort. My point is only that I can attach to that service. I can consume that as a service rather than going to that colo and deploying a rack of gear and a bunch of connections, which is the traditional way. More and more, we're going to see this, right? We're going to see, hey, there are certain things in the network that I just want to consume as a service. I need strong APIs to do that because I don't want to be dealing at the protocol layer, and the connectivity layer anymore, because quite frankly, those are solved problems, right? We're not solving problems in the network so much anymore at that layer, right? only very, very specialized problems. But what we are doing is trying to make the implementation of the customer's infrastructure as agile, as on demand as possible. And the only way to do that is to leverage services, to leverage virtualization, and to make that leverage be a programmable leverage via API. And that's what we've been really focused on here in the working group to kind of realize a model for that and understand what the layers are that customers really need to organize their thought process around.
And just to add on that, Steve, because I think that's very important point, because even that stack of SD-WAN infrastructure that is being done by someone else that I contract to do, even that stack, if it needs a service to give to the customer, let's say a geolocation service, or if it needs kind of a virus signature database, it's probably not going to build it itself, right? It's going to do an API call to some external service.
Absolutely.
And pick it up from there, because it's there, it's available, and maybe it's free even, right?
Yeah, and guess what? As me as a vendor, I don't want to build that service either if I know that
I don't want to
some
build
other
it.
part of my some other company in some other part of my
security.
company, right, has it. I just want to use it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for
Jump in there,
security. You're not going to build an identity management system. You're going to actually use the current best one available. And when it becomes superseded with another best one available, you want it to be seamless. And that's the whole concept of having secure, reliable, standardized API. So the whole thing can continually migrate, or you can actually use, some part of your organization can use the existing one, and you can experiment with new areas without disrupting the whole model here. You can start it in a particular region or for a particular application. I think that's the power of this, is to realize that our whole world is going to be in a state of migration and using best practices the whole time. And that's really how this model was derived, to bring it so that it all fits in together and is at the business level down, and not at the technology, not just pure based on what today's technology, and throw it all out and start again.
Yeah, so I'll throw in on this topic a little myself, on something that resonates with me. That this is great on paper. It's perfect as a notion. It's not like that end state exists yet, right? And this is why we need a playbook, in my opinion, and provide direction so organizations can have the discernment. Why am I passionate about it? Let's talk about security. One of the biggest things that Onug's involved in today is an open source initiative called the Cloud Security Notification Framework. What is it? Well, it's an initiative that our membership asked us to problem that our membership asked to go attack. CISOs from FedEx, from Cigna, from Raytheon, from Fidelity said, look, we're a multi-cloud environment. Part of our paper is talking about how to operate in a multi-cloud world. Guess what? Security messaging from the clouds is all different. It's all disparate. It's not like some API based with, everyone's standardized on, a MITRE attack framework or NIST inputs or what. It's not like that. And we need the discernment to be able to say, we've got to, as a community, we've got to drive this to achieve the kinds of things that I feel like you guys have spelled out in the playbook, so we can get there, because it's not there. It's not there yet. Not everywhere. Is that fair, or am I being unfair?
I think it is fair, and that's why a key part of the playbook is, okay, this is great. Where do I start? And the really concluding part of the playbook is the beginning of a step-by-step, so people can begin that implementation journey.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe a good time now, Mark, you can throw the pyramid up there. We can talk a little bit about it, because I think the value of this playbook isn't that we're answering every question at every layer yet, right? We know that each layer we got to dive into, and we've got to set some rules, just like you're doing in CSNF, Mark. Each one of these layers needs, it needs some rules and some definitions in order to make it pluggable the way it really needs to be, right? So if I just looking at the infrastructure layer, right, that's where we might see infrastructure as a service type approaches, or virtualization. If you're building your own virtualization, there's a ton of complexity inside virtualization, that virtualization layer, that you just don't want to maybe be involved in. I mean, if you're building a service where really all you care about is basically, getting a connectivity service up so I can get my applications running, or something that I can deploy new business applications quickly or get my users on quickly. Do you really want? I don't know if you want to. Some customers won't want to, stick at that layer. So that's where, for example, at the infrastructure layer, you might use an infrastructure as a service provider to do that. And I'm not necessarily saying a traditional managed service provider. Maybe somebody that's more automated, that you can do on demand type services, or you can just reach out with your network orchestrator and use their APIs in order to create connections, right? So that's the kind of consumption model change we're after, sort of at each layer of the stack, where we can access the layer below and consume services instead of technology, right? And that's what we want to build here. That's why we built this, this stack, and we organized it the way we did. Each layer, the idea is, hey, I've divided it up into a chunk that I can manage, and I want to communicate with each layer below using some APIs that allow me to consume services rather than technology. And here we've separated things out the way kind of we see things in the marketplace as well, right? So there's definitely a difference between the security layer, in my opinion, and the network layer, right? And generally speaking, security people think the network is always there, right? I have actually they assume that when I'm talking between users and applications or application components, that I have IP reachability, and you see this in application development all the time, right? Service meshes assume connectivity, right? It's just there,
That's how it should
and
be.
I can reach them all. Exactly, right? See,
That should
there's
be.
the security
You,
guy right there, right?
like the old phones, right? The old
Exactly.
phones. You pick up the phone, you have a dial
There
tone.
you
That's
go.
what network should be, right?
Exactly. And so some people, so the question is, how do we make it that way, right? So the internet does, the job to help with that, but in fact, there are other, there, we still need private networks, right? And somebody still has to build those. And so how do we make that building of those networks just like the internet? So if you use the internet, that's great, right? And we know that many, many companies and many businesses will move, potentially to a completely internet-based strategy over the next couple of years. But the question the question there is, okay, once I've done that, am I going to be able to get the differentiated performance and application services that I need to basically make my users, my customers productive, right? And that's the most important time. Dwell time, hang time is all super important here, right? So how do I make sure that whatever connectivity I'm using is the right connectivity for what I'm trying to do? Is internet going to suffice? Okay, good. If it's not, is there private network connectivity options that we can make look like the internet, but yet have differentiated services, differentiated characteristics, segmented services, things like that, that you can consume very easily and quickly to give you that, that on demand with the performance that you need. And so that's a big focus for us on the network overlay, the SD-WAN side, and the cloud connection, the cloud architecture side of the work we're doing in the working group. You'll see a lot of that in the paper.
Okay.
And by the way, when we say network overlay and security overlay, it doesn't mean that they are two different overlays and we are kind of stacking overlays. It might be the same, right?
No, that's
Yeah,
true. It's not.
security
Here we
applies.
go. Here we go, kids.
We're not talking about another set of tunnels, right?
Right,
We are
right.
talking about but if you think about it this way, and this is the way I've always said it, the security folks don't want the network folks to prune the topology for security. Okay,
Yeah.
they want to prune the topology, right? So if you think about how it's done in the cloud, you don't really prune the network topology. You set the access rules directly on the application layer, or at the VPC layer to make that happen, right? And the security will have control of that. And in a way, that's a perfectly valid and reasonable way to do it. It separates concerns, right? And so I'm trying to squeeze too much into a particular layer, and then it's like I'm lost because I'm trying to do so much there, right?
Absolutely. If we go back to checking that inside of the infrastructure, most of the traffic inside are tunnels. Why are there tunnels? Who is setting up those tunnels? It's the compute people and the application people to get away from the infrastructure people, right? That's why their tunnels are there. It's not because you need a tunnel. It's because that tunnel will get you away from the routing impositions, the security impositions done at the network layer, and you just need to get things working. And again, as Mark Fishburne mentioned, it's time to value, right? It's really time to value. If I don't do that tunnel, it will take me 3 months to get there, and I don't have
100%.
those 3 months.
That's another benefit of this model. It's a two-way street. It really helps the enterprises tune their infrastructure, their network, their whole approach to this, to their business. But it also allows new disruptive technologies to be introduced by innovative suppliers who can plug into this model without having to turn the whole thing upside down. And security is a great example in here, is that, and kind of Mark threatened I might talk about zero trust, and I'll do that. But so zero trust can be applied anywhere in this model, including at the policy management level. And we've got it in here with authentication and access, identity, and control and policy. And all of these things go together, but they can be applied anywhere and should be applied at many different points of this network. And so that whole infrastructure value in here is enhanced. It allows both the enterprises and medium-sized businesses to get their world tuned to the available technology and the other way around. So that it really feeds upon itself to increase the speed at which new technologies and new businesses can work together, as well as the introduction by innovative vendors.
Look, when we look at the pyramid as well, Mark, I mean, I kind of have an underhanded motive here, right? I have an agenda.
Really?
And we've talked about this. So we talk about there you go. So we talked about SASE, right? I mean, and now we've got this word in the industry, SASE. People think I can just go to the store and buy a loaf of bread and SASE, right? You just can't do that, right? So I mean, the SASE framework as an approach to security is highly beneficial, right? But there are many different ways to realize it. And depending on how the characteristics of your connectivity, what's more important to you, there are different ways to realize that, right? Especially if you've invested a lot in SD-WAN, or you plan to invest in SD-WAN, as many customers do in the access. Do you want to terminate your SD-WAN at the local co-location facility and then manage another network for the middle mile, right, to get to the rest of the way to your applications? Or do you want to have the same kind of management that basically covers all your connectivity, but you want to add that the security into it, right? And then we talk about zero trust again. The true model of zero trust will take many years to get to, right? I mean, for sure. So in the meantime, we have to provide practical solutions to our customers. If we had zero trust in every application today, we wouldn't need application layer gateways in the cloud either, right? So the key thing is to basically understand the tools that are in the toolbox that are needed to build these types of services and how they relate to each other. And that's what we try to bring in with with our playbook, is to try to basically help you to relate those things. So as you're planning out how to think about your infrastructure and how to organize it, because organization is the first thing, right, that you need to think about when you're transforming your business. How you're going to approach that. So
and just because you mentioned SASE, and again, SASE, everyone knowing now that SASE is a bunch of a lot of things, right? and zero trust being one part of it, right? But when we start thinking about all these functions and all these acronyms and the CASBs and the SDPs and all these things, not everyone needs everything, right? And people need to be realizing that that they need to know their infrastructure, they need to know what they want to accomplish, and they need to choose the services that they need. It doesn't mean that they will need SASE or everything, right? They might do, right? But they might not need the whole thing,
100%.
because they might be solving that problem in a different way. Or they might...
and Nuno as well, these acronyms come and go just as fast as technologies as well. So the attempt here is to kind of separate what is a marketing collection of terms to what's real, so that when the enterprises are making decisions about what to buy and when to buy it, they can delegate that to whether it's an MSP or a cloud provider or a service provider without abdicating the knowledge about it. Because that's another thing that's happened with security. When cloud came along, people delegated compute and storage, but they kind of abdicated the security aspects of it. So it's very important as these new concepts come along to actually understand what you're doing, so you can delegate it to third parties, etc. Not worry about it, use APIs, but not abdicate the knowledge, because ultimately you, as running the enterprise business, you're responsible for everything.
Yes, Mark, but the problem is that the MSP might be tied to one specific view of the world. It's their view, right? And what they are going to recommend to that company, it's going to be whatever they are provisioning, or to be honest, whatever they can deliver.
Well,
Because
exactly.
they will be focusing
Exactly.
on one thing, right?
I agree with that. So I think that what a service that Onug can provide here is really to help people differentiate, what's important from
Yes.
what is hype. And I agree entirely with what you're saying.
And maybe even challenging the MSP, right? Saying to the MSP, well, you provide me this framework, but I want this.
Yeah,
right?
and they can say, well, how are you handling this? And what happens when I want to migrate from this to this? And I don't want to hear your version of a marketing slogan, which is really a standard to which you've added something. So it really helps the enterprises differentiate and really question what they're being offered in a more intelligent way. I agree.
And that's why I think in our paper, we are kind of decoupling all these constructs and explaining people what do they mean, and kind of figuring out or telling people, do you need this part? If yes, then kind of do it this way, or kind of show one of the paths that can be done, right? But at least that part of this deconstructing the whole thing, now I don't know if you guys are foodies. I like food. But it's all about deconstructing things, right? Deconstructing like lots of different
disaggregation,
disaggregating like the food and kind of building it up, But this part is very important, because if people know what really they are looking, it's not because the MSP says, well, we should do antivirus and we should do that in the network layer, right? Why should we do that? And I think the paper really goes and uncovers that, right? Uncovers all those layers, all those things. What does it mean? How is it built, and how does it fit inside of the framework? And then if you say, well, I want A, B, C, but I don't really need D, and I might need, I don't know, something else like G or H, then how can you fit those things together, right? And how can you use them? And again, going back to what Mark, you and Steve have been saying, it's about using it as a service and consuming it as a service. You can consume it if you want. If you don't consume it, you don't pay for it. But if you want to consume it, you might be able to. You might want to consume it right now, or you might want to consume it later on without needing to change the entire infrastructure, right? And that's where pretty much I really like the term, as you guys know here in the group. I really like the term elastic infrastructure. Obviously now we change it, but I really like the term, because it's really about what we are trying to do here in the infrastructure, is to make it elastic. Today I have a service I'm consuming. Tomorrow I don't want to consume it anymore. I don't need to change anything. I just take off that service, and the workflow and the framework of every other service that I'm using just flows naturally without that new service. And tomorrow I want to add a new service. I just add it into the workflow, and again, my performance, my latency, my whatever doesn't change dramatically, or at least I don't need to change anything in the infrastructure to implement that new service.
That is the property that we're after, right? So when I'm, at least if I'm enterprise and I'm trying to move fast, I need sovereignty over what I need to do. I can't always go and talk to a vendor or talk to a managed service provider and say, hey, I'm really thinking of changing my business model or running a new business. I need you to deploy this and this network, and I need these properties. I need to get that stuff going very quickly. I need to have cloud speed, right? And so that's super important part of what we're trying to do here. So our group is called the Network Cloud, because that's what we're trying to build, right? Key aspect of network cloud is elastic infrastructure, and how do we make the service, how do we make that access part of the network, the middle mile part of the network, the cloud itself, what I'm building in the cloud, elastic, right? And how do I make it, on demand, changeable? I'll give you an example. Even today, in the past, if I was doing a data center migration from one technology to the other, it was expensive and time consuming. Customers would always say, oh, I want you to, they would always say to me, Steve, I want you to give me, two technologies in a single box, right? Or if I'm trying to migrate from one to the other, so I can, I don't have to buy a new box, right? But when you think about cloud and network as a service, we don't even have to think about it anymore. I can spool up another virtual aggregation site, aim my traffic over there, and migrate, as I'm building that new site, keeping the other site up. This is a tremendous property of elasticity that we can build into the network today, right? Absolutely. And so Steve, and so that's key.
Steve, I'd also want to say it's not just that the building blocks are elastic. It lends itself to having a more elastic business infrastructure as well. So as companies move from more monolithic way of managing their organizations to one which is more modern and brings in distributed thinking and experimentation. It allows you to actually introduce ideas in a new way that make the to fail fast when things don't work, and then to move and develop the ideas that are working well. So it really is in tune with the dynamic new way of managing businesses. And you look at, whether it's Waze or Airbnb, whoever it is, it's completely disrupted business by introducing new ideas that suddenly worked and basically obsoleted, disrupted old technologies. And having a model like this to start to experiment with new disruptive technologies without damaging what is currently earning you revenue, it allows it to migrate very quickly to new ways of managing your business as well, which really weren't there before. And it can be done at the pace you want to migrate the technology, the pace in which you want to migrate the way your business operates. So it's really a kind of concept whose time is now. And I can imagine that the more people adopt this, they'll look back and say, "Duh, why weren't we doing this before?"
Well, they couldn't do it before. It was too much, right? I mean, it just wasn't agile enough. But I mean,
Well,
everybody wanted
what
to.
they
But next
Part of
time,
the
my
answer-
next business model, I had to change everything, right? So it's
Part
like,
of the
whoa.
answer is because they didn't have this crew helping them get there.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's all
right?
our
So
fault. We didn't do it sooner.
I'm going to use
Mark Tierney
that
wants to
as
shut us up. So before Mark Tierney wants to shut us up, let me just close the circle, because picking up on Mark Fishburne's words is that business model and that operational model that closes the loop and gets people
Yes.
back to the business drivers, right?
Exactly.
How are we solving the business?
Yeah, and if we could bring, because that's how I wanted to wrap. Nuno, thank you, because it's perfect. If we could bring the pyramid back up, and
I think I've shared it, haven't I? Yeah, I have.
And just let's talk about this. So today was a primer, right? The truth is that we have all these layers, all these features and functionality that are inside this model. And so I do want to do a little bit of a broad stroke and explain to the audience that this is just the beginning. We're going to have a continued dialogue about this. This team is going to, we have other members that are going to come join us, and we're going to do some deeper dives into this pyramid. What you're looking at, quite frankly, is kind of a common metaphor that we're using at Onug: maturity models, business value, features, growth. Like you would, if you were on the network cloud team, if you were on the automated cloud governance team, if you were on the orchestration automation, cloud native security, or AI ops, any of those teams, you're going to see something just like this. And again, credit to this group. Always eyes on the business value side of this pyramid, right? How do we get there? Because if we can't tell a story there, then we don't have a story. And so, Steve, kind of wrap us up. I know we're going to be doing some deeper dives. What excites you on the pyramid? Like, and not that we're going to handle it next, but what are the things that you're excited about talking about in the future?
So what I'm excited to talk about in the future. So if obviously we want to go through and talk about everything we've done in the paper, explain the motivation and what the value we see you can get out of this, right? So the paper is kind of organized, business value. Why do you want to do this? What is it? What impact does it have on your business? And then it really goes through what's happening in the network, what's happening in security, to try to explain it to everybody, right? So you have a good, solid understanding of what's going on. Gives you a better chance to think about what your plan needs to be, and that's where this framework we just saw comes in, right? The exciting things, the next things that I think are going to really take our time, and I hope that people, will engage with us on this, just like you guys are doing on the cloud security notification framework, right? You're talking about common data formats. Why are we doing all this translation between different tools? It's a waste of time, right? And it's a lot of energy, and every vendor has to, focus on, data formats, for cloud notifications if you want to plug other tools in, right? Same thing is here, right? All those layers that we showed. First of all, the layers give us the chance of abstraction, but the key thing is, what does the data format for the APIs look like for those at the service layer between those layers, right? And that's where we want to focus. Can we, get, some, open API specs and data formats going so that we can start to build towards those? That's going to give us the pluggability that we need between each layer of the spec. And, it's very much a traditional layer model, but in the past, all those layers of the stack were in one thing, one place, one package software, one router, whatever you want to call it. Now with the virtualization and cloud, these things are breaking up. Now it's an opportunity for us to really focus on that service layer consumption, pluggability, APIs. That's where we're going next, and I think that's going to be very, very cool.
Final thoughts from you.
Yeah, so the topics that I'm passionate about, it's of course the entirety of itself. It's how you can actually drive business and improve operations with a solution, with a technical solution. It's about identity. I'm as you guys know here in the group, and just for people to know, I'm passionate about identity because I do believe that that's one of the few ways to get there, right? To get to this model that Steve mentioned about. To be able to identify things by not only bigger identities but smaller identities of smaller things, and we all have live and Internet of Things, and in my house I have lots of smart things and smart devices that are able to do things by themselves. But if they use my identity is a problem. If they use their own identity is much better and more secure, right? So security obviously is a big part of it. But Steve, Mark, it's really about driving that operational benefit, right? Because if you don't drive a benefit for a company, then you are just playing around with bits and bytes. So everything that we build, every infrastructure, every framework that we build, it needs to be adding value to the business, right? And if we don't figure that out, then there's no point.
Parting shots, Mr. Fishburne.
Yeah, kind of echoes both of those. Really, when you look at APIs, you have to say, well, what is it between A and B? And I think you want to make sure that you don't just regard the enterprise as the enterprise, but look at the myriad of different applications there might be in different businesses, and to understand what they might be. And it could be medical, with being able to distribute patient records in a secure manner with APIs that wasn't possible before. It might be operating utility systems or smart traffic systems or whatever it is, or it's how can this be applied? And I think that's really where the Onug community of enterprise users can interact much more strongly with the groups who are producing this, to make sure that they can understand that we all understand what needs to be added to this, and make many different kinds of enterprises work together better in partnership, and how we can actually connect more agile systems together, as we've discussed. So I think there's a lot of different ways forward in this that it will build.
That's perfect. I appreciate it. I said at the beginning of the show, I manage all the working groups. How can I have a favorite? But if I did,
and we just scratched the surface, right, Mark? We could be
can't. And by the way, sometimes your favorites are the most problematic, right? Like that.
There you go. Exactly.
All right. So thanks everybody. Thanks for listening. Listen, the ONA community is just this amazing group. It's this amazing group of Global 2000 companies, and listening to this kind of content, if you want to know how to get involved, there's so many ways to get involved. You could join the collaborative. You could, if you're a supplier, get involved in the working groups. If you're a consumer, get involved in the working groups. You can be a presenter at at our conference. We're going to be at like I said, we're going to be at the Meadowlands on April 27th and 28th. We're back live. It'll be hybrid, but we've got some amazing things planned for this coming back. What we're saying now is, it works because you saw it in Onug, and we're going to be doing live demonstrations of behind me, the Cloud Security Notification Framework. It'll be our MVP iteration of that open source initiative, which is there to help multi-cloud consumers consume security, reduce toil, reduce technical debt, and just make their world an easier place to live in. Also, the Orchestration Automation Working Group is going to be doing live demonstrations on, in many ways, how to take advantage of what's happening in this playbook and how to implement those from an orchestration automation perspective. So it's going to be great. It works because you saw it in Onugs or because you watched us here. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next Onug podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.